Hello! There are thousands of apocalypse stories, from zombie invasions to worldwide flood. But today we're going to retell you the plot of a show, which gives the viewer a whole new perspective on the end of the world. And if you're an aerophobe, it'll be especially scary. In the middle of the night, a flight to Moscow is preparing to take off from Brussels airport. At this time, several strange things are happening in the boarding area. A girl is on a call with a friend from New York and sees her suddenly fainting. A man is sitting in a cafe, watching strange footage from other countries on TV. A bunch of people lying on the ground in strange poses. A few minutes later, the man knocks out the guard armed with the assault rifle, takes it and runs to the nearest plane. Precisely the one flying to Moscow. Flight attendant Gabriella tries to stop the intruder, but gives up and lets him on board. He immediately gets into the cockpit and demands that the plane take off right away. The man injures the pilot in his left arm, but still argues he can't take off alone. His partner hasn't arrived yet. Then, the hijacker runs into the cabin and asks if there's any other pilots among the passengers. The silence is broken by Sylvie, a girl. She used to fly helicopters in the past. The man puts a gun to the back of Sylvie's head and forces the pilot to accelerate immediately and fly west. The pilot disobeys. The plane takes off. The invader introduces himself as an Italian Major Terenzio Gallo, and the pilot says his name is Matthew. The military man says that he accidentally heard about an impending anomaly at NATO headquarters. Then the sun rose over Asia and America, and the predictions came true. People did, indeed, drop dead with the first rays of the sun. Now the trio need to come up with some kind of plan. However, things are complicated by the fact that the electronics and communications on board don't work. Gallo knocked them out with gunshots. Gallo, Sylvie, and Matthew decide not to tell the passengers about the sun, otherwise panic would set in. Matthew speaks to the people through the speakers and says that they'll likely land in another city and then return to Moscow. One of the passengers, a young Arab boy, has a strange attack. Ayez, a Turk, takes advantage of the situation to take Gallo's gun. He demands that the major be locked in the bathroom and tells the other passengers what's going on. Matthew complies with his demands and tells him that the hijacker is out of his mind. They will land in Iceland, hand Gallo over to the police, and return to Moscow.
Si je faisais pas semblant, moi, de croire à sa psychose, qu'est-ce qu'il aurait fait?
Je dis la vérité.
The situation on board heats up. Nurse Laura suspects that the Arab boy has something wrong with his stomach, but does not understand foreign speech and asks for an interpreter. An airport worker, Osman, who happened to be on the flight, volunteers to help. Sylvie and Matthew are about to land in Reykjavik, even though the air traffic controllers do not respond. They descend as low as possible and see that the entire runway is littered with burning planes. It's impossible to land in these conditions. The passengers and pilots realize that the Italian was not lying. They let Gallo out of the toilet and give him his weapon back. The military man tells them that all they need to do to save themselves is to run from dawn and stay on course to the west. However, there is less and less fuel, and Matthew panics. Suddenly, Sylvie offers a solution. She's discovered a military base in Scotland that's not far away. There, they'll have a whole hour before dawn to refuel and decide what to do next. Meanwhile, the Arab boy's condition is getting worse. The interpreter manages to make out one phrase from his mumbling. Finally, the plane lands hard at the Scottish base. An unidentified military vehicle pulls up to the gateway, and 3 British soldiers emerge. They say their only hope is to get on this flight. Laura tries to resuscitate the Arab boy, but he's already dead. The passengers can't make up their minds as to what to do about him, so the body is placed in the baggage compartment. The passengers scatter around the airport to find supplies and fuel, food and equipment. Soon, the plane rises into the air again and flies towards Canada. During the flight, the sysadmin Horst manages to fix the router and Wi-Fi is enabled on board. Some passengers receive farewell messages from their loved ones. And Rick, a Dane, finds an important scientific article. It states that the incredible anomaly may be related to the reversal of the sun's polarity and the subsequent gamma ray burst.
Comme si des milliards de bombes à neutrons explosaient toutes les secondes.
Ayez asks Sylvie to talk privately. He shows her an article that he accidentally found while Googling information about the Scottish base. It turns out that the soldiers on board are war criminals who committed horrible crimes in Afghanistan. Ayaz says that these men deserve to die, and that leaving them on the plane is totally unacceptable. Sylvie comes to Matthew in the cockpit, where a British pilot now takes her place, and in French tells the commander information about the newly arrived soldiers. The soldier suspects something, but does not understand the meaning of her words. The plane lands safely.
Die zijn gewoon gevallen terwijl ze bezig waren.
Matthew divides the passengers into several groups. Some will go into the city to look for food, others for fuel, and the rest for electronics. The pilot gives the latter task to the British, so as to have an excuse to get rid of them. But they refuse to go alone and demand to take stewardess Gabriella and mechanic Jacob with them. The soldier group arrives at the electronics store. Jacob asks the boys to look for radios in the back room, locks them up, and orders Gabriella to run after him immediately. The stewardess hesitates for some reason. Jacob runs alone, barely having time to get away from the criminals. As soon as Jacob arrives at the gangway, the passengers lock the door of the plane and prepare to take off. However, the British soldiers are already on the runway, and they are armed. The shooting begins. Matthew hesitates whether to leave without Gabriella, but Sylvie convinces him and they take off. After gaining the proper altitude, Matthew exits the cockpit and discovers that one of the portholes is damaged. The pilot asks Rick to monitor the crack and report any changes to him. Horst reports to Matthew that they've managed to make contact with another plane. They learn that there's some sort of underwater base in Hawaii to train astronauts. A base of this kind must be protected against all kinds of radiation, including solar radiation. So Matthew decides to fly to Honolulu. A little later, an emergency situation arises in the cockpit. Sylvie and Matthew begin to act by the flight rulebook. But the alarm quickly goes off, followed briefly by another. The pilot says that someone may have gotten into the cargo hold and tries to disable the system.
Ok, mais qui?
Un des soldats. Il a dû escalader dans l'avion au moment du décollage.
At first, Matthew decides to go higher up so that the temperature and the percentages of oxygen in the air drop drastically. Then he recalls cases where people flew out in the cargo hold without a ticket for 10 hours and survived. So there's only one certain way to get rid of our unwanted guest. Rick is distracted by going to the bathroom and talking to Gallo. No one notices as the crack on the porthole grows and the glass bursts. The cabin is depressurized. The oxygen masks fall out and some passengers cannot return to their seats because of the strong wind. Finally, Jacob manages to close the gap in the cabin with a metal plate. Matthew tells the passengers that they won't make it to Hawaii before dawn, so they have to land in Alaska. Sylvie tells Matthew that the hydraulics keep malfunctioning, which means that the military man in the compartment survived after all. The pilot has no choice but to send Gallo, Jacob, and Ayaz to the cargo bay with an assault rifle. When the trio returns on board, all passengers look at Ayaz with distrust. Matthew asks if it's true that the Turk opened up the young Arab's belly in Canada and took out the diamonds. Ayaz pulls a scattering of emeralds from his pocket and tells him that they're an ancient national relic. He paid the guy to carry them, but he didn't follow the instructions and died. However, the passengers don't appreciate Ayaz's honesty. They call him a murderer and vote for his punishment. The plane lands in Alaska, and Matthew informs the passengers that they won't be able to get to Hawaii anytime soon. To avoid the sun, they need to fly west. The most logical way is to return to Belgium. Rick, meanwhile, suggests leaving Ayaz in Alaska. The passengers decide to vote. At first, everyone is hostile to the Turk, but they're unexpectedly interrupted by Major Gallo. He announced that he plans to go to NATO headquarters in Brussels, where he can find information about the bunkers, and that Ayaz is the only one who can help him in this mission. Horst enters into the cabin of Matthew and Sylvie. The guy says that several people have complained about the taste of the fruits and vegetables they brought back from Canada. In his opinion, the radiation, which not only kills people, but also changes the DNA of food, is to blame. Sylvie notices that during his conversation with Horst, Matthew behaves strangely. He shouts, gets irritated, and sweats. Rika and Ayaz drag him out of the cockpit. The passenger asks the pilot to rest for a while. He says he's fine, he just needs to go to the bathroom and wash his face with cold water. After a while, Sylvie notices that Matthew is missing and realizes that he never came out of the restroom. All symptoms indicate that Matthew's injured arm has caused sepsis. Laura says that the only way out is to amputate the infected tissue. Passengers persuade her to have the operation, but it requires getting to Brussels. Now, Sylvie has to land the plane alone, and she's never done that. The team has about 2.5 hours total. Horst and Jakub discovers that the same thing has happened to the fuel as to the food. It's gone bad. This news causes panic, but Osman offers a solution. He knows a place in Antwerp where the jet fuel is kept underwater, which means it's protected from radiation. Osman and Jakub go there in a fuel truck. Laura, in the company of the other passengers, goes to the hospital to operate on the pilot. The trio, led by Major Gallo, arrive at NATO headquarters, but find no important documents in the meeting room. Rick guesses that there are cameras that record sound and goes to the security booth to listen to them. Left alone in the room, Ayaz and Gallo continue to look for clues in the papers. The Italian major makes some insulting comments about Ayaz's nationality, and they begin to fight. At one point, Gallo hits his rival with a heavy object, miscalculating his strength. Ayaz lies on the floor motionless. Gallo leaves the breathless Turk on the floor and goes back to Rick. He says that he's found out the information about the bunker. The shelter is in Bulgaria, and now they even have its coordinates. The major suggests that they leave because Ayaz, according to him, has already returned. Matthew successfully survives the surgery, and the group rushes from the hospital to the plane. Rick and Gallo are already standing at the ramp, as the major pretends not to know where Ayaz is. Finally, the whole team is on board, and Matthew can even take the flight in the pilot's seat. Ayaz is still missing. The pilot almost decides to take off without the passenger, but Zara notices something suspicious. She asks Rick what happened at the NATO headquarters. The truth is quickly revealed, and the passengers realize that Gallo has betrayed his comrade. It's not until just before the start of the run-up that Sylvie and Matthew see a car with Ayaz at the wheel on the runway. Gallo is punished and gets handcuffed in the technical compartment. Jakub discovers that the coordinates Rick obtained match the location of a large hydroelectric plant in Bulgaria. This means that the bunker is underwater and can actually save them. The only problem is that the coordinates are incomplete, and they would have to find shelter in literally half an hour. Finally, the plane lands. The team splits into two groups, one led by Sylvie and the other by Ayaz. In the middle of the journey, Ayaz gets sick, and because of him, one of the SUVs gets into an accident.
Elle bougera pas, on va finir à pied.
Meanwhile, Sylvie, Matthew, and the other passengers are already passing through the station's main gate. The only problem is that the gates are under high voltage and are closing. The only way to keep them open is to hold down a special button the whole time. Unexpectedly, Gallo volunteers to do this. Sylvie agrees, but leaves one hand of the major's handcuffed to the pole. Ayaz's group approaches the bunker from the other side. There is no gate, only an electrified wire. There's no time to look for another way in, and Horst comes up with an ingenious idea: to use the tires as grounding. In the meantime, Sylvie and company have already found the door to the bunker and opened it. Only a minute left before dawn. Gallo tries to free himself the whole time, but when he sees the first rays of sunlight, he resigns himself to his fate. Ayaz's group finally reaches the bunker, meets Sylvie, and goes downstairs. There, they're blocked by armed soldiers.
Where's Sylvie?
Me.
After making sure that they're friendly, the military men let the team into the bunker. Several dozen people are inside, including Matthew and the other passengers. What would you do if you learned of such a terrible anomaly? Would you also look for ways to escape from the deadly sun, or would you accept your fate and spend your last hours with your loved ones? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to support the channel by leaving a like and subscribing so that you can keep up with more exciting stories.